MSW Media.
Hi, I'm Harry Littman, host of Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent figures from government law and journalism for a dynamic discussion of the most important topics of the day. Each Monday, I'm joined by a slate of Feds favorites and new voices to break down the headlines and give the insider's view of what's going on in Washington and beyond. Plus sidebars explaining important legal concepts read by your favorite celebrities. Find Talking Feds wherever you get your podcasts.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hello, welcome to episode 110 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, March 1st. I'm your host, Pete Strzok.
Hey, Pete. I'm Allison Gill. Thanks to all the patrons, by the way, for your amazing feedback for me and Pete's first bonus episode this weekend. And per usual, I'd like to give a shout out to our new and returning patrons. We'll start, by the way, when you sign up, it's $1 an episode. You can give us whatever name you like a pub trivia thing, and we have to read it. So here we go with Ag Primatic. I don't know if that's AG or Ag. Peggy Kittle, Don Stevens, Cheryl Gomes, Andrea Milsom, Left Rudder, nice, Linda B. Rostad, Mark Wortman, Alyssa F., Lucia Stern, Adan Tejada, Kaz Koman, Diego Navarro, Sarah Cork Henderson, Brian Body, Mary Milosevec Grizzle, Gail Markham, Emily Verheen, Corey Jacoby, and JJ in DC. Hello! So if you want to join us, head to patreon.com/aisle45pod for the ad-free feed. That's AISLE45POD. So thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank all of you so much. Now, we have a lot to cover today, including a brand new just-in filing in the Dominion defamation case against Fox News and a civil forfeiture complaint against Viktor Vekselberg, which was filed by the Department of Justice.
Oh, poor Victor.
What's an oligarch to do? So many U.S. properties, so many Hamptons, luxury estates, and brownstones in Manhattan. Just a sad, sad day. Yeah,
I remember when people were complaining about the cost of the Mueller investigation. I'm like, dude, we made money on those Manafort forfeitures.
just on Manafort. Just on Manafort, let alone, a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's kick this off with an absolutely astounding new filing from Dominion in the Fox News defamation case. A little bit of background. Dominion, company that makes voting machines, filed a $1.6 billion lawsuit against Fox. Last week, we got the explosive motion for summary judgment from Dominion, where we learned what all the Fox News hosts were really saying behind our backs, behind the scenes. And then Fox filed their motion to dismiss. But today, we got the responses to those filings, where both sides get to file their replies to these motions. A lot of stuff in here, Pete.
Yeah, it is. And, if the prior filing from Dominion made you understand just the depth of the lies that Fox was telling and how much they knew it, all this does is just provide more information about that. And just, the absolute contempt, one, that Fox held their viewers in. And two, it was like the inmates were running the asylum. Just time and time again, you can see this pervasive fear that they say the first negative thing about Donald Trump and they'd lose views, they'd lose money. And at the end of the day, having those lies to keep people coming back and listening to support Trump was more important than telling the truth. I mean, it's astounding. And I'm still going through it before we, right up into the going live here. I was reading through it and still haven't gotten through it, but it's just astounding.
Yeah, it's like 200 pages. And, you're talking about the money part here. They were so worried. There's all these emails back and forth about losing viewers to Newsmax, losing viewers to OANN. And when asked why Fox continued, this, by the way, includes parts of depositions from people like Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch and Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, who sits on the board of the parent company of Fox, and Ms. Scott, who I believe is an executive there. But when asked why Fox continued to platform like Mike Lindell, for example, Rupert Murdoch said, well, it's not red or blue, it's green, basically insinuating it's about money, right?
Yeah, and it's like, dude, aren't you, and he said at the same time, he's like, well, he acknowledged that numerous Fox hosts had what he called, or had said, quote, endorsed at times the false notion of a stolen election. And all these things, it's like, dude, weren't you the man in charge? Aren't you? You're saying all these things were bad and wrong and lies were being told and people were coming on. Aren't you? Doesn't the buck stop with you? Aren't you the bajillionaire head of this entire enterprise? And, he's throwing all these people under the bus, but it goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, and actually right after the election, he called Mitch McConnell. Murdoch called Mitch McConnell and said, could you guys tone it down and not spread these election lies? And apparently that didn't happen. And one of the more explosive pieces of news here was that Rupert Murdoch gave Jared Kushner access to confidential information about Joe Biden's ads before they aired. He showed them to Kushner before they went public.
Right. And some of the things that came out, it's the showing this really tight link between Fox News on the one hand, the hosts, as well as people who were in and around Trump. There was that. There were this guy, Raj Shah, who was the head of what the best, 1984 euphemism ever, the Brand Protection Unit. He used to work in the Trump White House as an aide. And he told Lachlan Murdoch and Viet Din, who was like the in-house, one of the in-house counsels, we can't call the election for Biden, because if we do, we're going to get hit really, really hard by the right. And it's almost all these things. It's not only the lies, it's all these very close, intimate links to the Trump administration. And it's almost like, I don't think many people are going to be surprised by this hearing it, but like Fox was like this de facto propaganda arm of the Trump administration. There were all these lies. They knew they were lies. They were sharing it with the Trump administration directly. They were hiring people who used to exist in the administration, and just this tight coordination at the expense of the truth is astounding in some of these quotes.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Russian state television.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Russia, or if you go in like any totalitarian regime, like go and read like some of the stuff, on the better side of things, Xinhua or something in China, but on the worst side of things, North Korean television, where they're up there screaming their support for dear leader, and, whether he's launching 70 missiles or whether he's gone out and hit, 14 hole-in-ones and an 18 round of golf. It's the same sort of deification of somebody. And you see in all these quotes, they create this monster of their base, and they're afraid of them. They don't want to cross them. On the one hand, there's, it's, I think, primarily money driven. They don't want to lose the viewership, but time and time again, you see all the reference of, well, we don't want to upset the viewers. We don't want to create any sort of problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they knew that too. And Paul Ryan, who was on the board of the parent company for Fox, said in a deposition that these conspiracy theories are baseless. We should labor to dispel conspiracy theories when they pop up, and told Rupert Murdoch Fox News should not be spreading conspiracy theories. So he kind of saw the writing on the wall early on, warning, like we could get a lot of legal trouble here.
Right. But then, to that point, he, on the one hand, he saw that and understood it and voiced that concern, but did he go public? No. Did he resign his spot on the board? No. I mean, there are people that, I'll make a note of this, but at the end of the day, if it's going to keep me from getting my monthly retainer or whatever it is that they're paying him to be on the board, I'm not going to make a move. So I just, on the one hand, Paul Ryan said and tried to do to some extent the right thing, but all these folks at the end of the day, it was, and, Rudy, everybody's favorite. There's this Rupert Murdoch at one point says, hey, Rudy was out there. He was saying all these lies. Could you have stopped him? He's like, well, I could have, but I didn't. So it's just, like Paul Ryan, like everybody else, seeing something going wrong, are being false, knowing that it's wrong or knowing that it's false, maybe making a half-hearted attempt to say something, but at the end of the day, just getting steamrolled by this just parade of lies.
Yeah, this money machine. And this next one is actually really chilling. And I think is one of the other big points that, one of the bigger news items that's coming out of this filing. On January 5th, right, the day before the insurrection, Rupert Murdoch and Ms. Scott discussed whether Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and Laura Ingraham should say some version of the election is over, Biden won. He hoped, I'm quoting now from the filing, he hoped those words would, quote, go a long way to stop the Trump myth that the election was stolen, unquote. Scott told Murdoch, quote, privately, they're all there, meaning the hosts. They all know these are lies. Privately, they're all there, but we need to be careful about using the shows and pissing off the viewers. So nobody made a statement. And the next day was the attack on the Capitol.
Right. And how many of those folks who dissent, the ground level folks, the muscles, not the Proud Boys, not the Oath Keepers, not the people who organized it, but the people who were just encouraged or felt motivated to get in a car, hop on a bus and come to protest. That's the core. That's the base that are listening to all these lies. And so whether it's January 6th, whether it's the attack on, on Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, whether it's the attack on some, FBI field office in Cincinnati or, threats made to judges, all of these things go back to this sense of grievance and the sense that there were, this illegal activity, this voting fraud, all these lies that Fox was propagating. In so many ways, you can draw the line from those falsehoods to this sense of, righteous anger and indignation by Trump supporters who then take action. And in this case, the day, like you said, the day before January 6th, they thought about saying something, knowing they should have said something, and yet decided not to. And instead we get, an insurrection. And it was, and after that, there's this January 12th, where Rupert Murdoch, going back to Paul Ryan again, and he tells him, well, the insurrection was, quote, it was a wake-up call for Hannity, who's been privately disgusted by Trump for weeks, but was scared to lose viewers. But did Hannity has he ever since said a word about being disgusted by Trump?
No. And I have to wonder, too, if any of these people who've been arrested and, charged, put in jail, given probation, pled guilty to attacking the Capitol on January 6th, can, depending on what happens in this particular defamation case, can they turn around and sue Fox News? I mean, this seems like it could open up a floodgate of legal ramifications for Fox. I mean, knowing that all this is out there, if you were brainwashed by Fox News, well, I watched a lot of Fox News. We saw a lot of that in these defendants, talking to the judges, trying to, showing remorse. I don't know what I was thinking. I was caught up in the moment. We heard a lot. And I was listening to Fox News at the time. I was told that Fox News told me the election was stolen. The president told me the election was stolen. And I mean, that's not a defense for, committing a crime. We've learned because you can't commit a crime because of that. But maybe there's room for civil action for these folks. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for sure. And I'm sure there are good defense attorneys as well as potential, plaintiffs' attorneys who are looking on the one hand exactly that, saying, okay, whether or not I bring a suit against Fox, when it comes to sentencing, when it comes to my trial, can I say my poor, 28-year-old Trump supporter who lives and breathes Fox News every day, that he really felt that there was something horrible that had happened and that, yes, he shouldn't have done this, but he believed what he was seeing on the news. He believed what he was hearing from Donald Trump. And so, not saying he's not guilty, but you should go leniently on him because he just believed these things, which clearly were lies. But how was he supposed to know it? Because Fox knew it and ignored it. And then I also wonder if you are one of the DC police officers, one of the Capitol police officers who were assaulted by this crowd, and you can show, okay, in some ways, because defendants are saying, I believe Trump, I believe what I heard on Fox, that's why I came to the Capitol, that's why I engaged in violence. Is there some sort of path for them as plaintiffs to go after Fox for damages? Because, they caused, if they can show to some extent that they caused this group to believe this wrongdoing, that they knew to be lies, which then led to the violence on January 6th. Is there some opening there? But I'm sure there attorneys who are, much more equipped to think about that than I am, kind of considering whether or not there's a route there.
Yeah, well, and if I'm attorneys for the plaintiffs in like the Blasingame case, which is some of the Capitol Police officers suing Donald Trump, I would do an amended complaint to add Fox News to that. On it, personally, that's what I would do that with these, in light of these revelations. And here's one a bit that where a redaction is kind of more interesting than what's not redacted, and this goes to what you were saying, Pete, about being in touch with Trump. And this is, I'm reading here from the filing on November 8th, right? This is the day after they declared for Biden. Bartiromo brought Sidney Powell onto her show to air the false claims about the Dominion voting machines. The Fox platform gave Powell the stamp of credibility and the distribution of her bullshit message, right? I'm paraphrasing that. Goes on to say, and while Trump was widely known to be a voracious consumer of Fox News, Bartiromo did not leave anything to chance. Redacted, redacted, redacted. So did Bartiromo contact Trump? Like, why? And why would that be redacted, Pete?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good catch on your part. I think it certainly implies that whether or not it says she didn't, right? It wasn't Fox didn't leave anything. Bartiromo did not leave anything to chance. So the implication is whatever's coming is something she did. Now, whether she reached out to Trump, which I think is the most likely, whether she reached out to Mark Meadows or somebody around him to say, hey, turn it on. I think what's redacted is clear that there was some attempt made to reach somebody, either Trump or people around him. Now, whether it's redacted, that's a good question. I mean, some of it may be in the context of during a deposition where there was subject to a protective order that one of the parties, either she or somebody on the other side who received a call from her, didn't agree to lifting the protected nature of that statement. But I think your read's exactly right. I think the most likely, event is she called Trump. Now, I doubt Trump said, oh, yes, she called me. But is it possible that, Jared or Ivanka or Mark Meadows or, somebody in the White House said, oh, yeah, I remember him. I remember her calling him. Or somebody like, it could be too, Maria Bartiromo's executive producer or staff assistant or somebody after the show is in her deposition in this lawsuit, or his deposition in this lawsuit, says, oh yeah, I remember the boss actually called Trump and they had a conversation and she told him to tune in, and that person doesn't want, or somebody doesn't want their name released. So probably it is likely to protect the source of that information. I would think it is likely to be a third party, not Bartiromo, not Trump and or Meadows, but somebody who is telling the Dominion in this case about that communication that occurred. But that's a guess. But to me, that makes sense given what they left right before that.
That's interesting. I just thought that was really weird. Like, she didn't want to leave anything to chance. Oh, well, okay. And back to Viet Dinh, who's the lawyer, general counsel for Fox at the time. He confirmed that responsibility for publication extends up and down the chain of command, and those, quote, with the power to exercise control had an obligation to prevent guests from telling lies when asked about that. So he said that. And when we get to the fact checkers, this was an interesting bit too. Fox's internal research department, called the Brain Room.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In the land of blind people, the one-eyed man is king, right? Yeah. That's it. Think about the brain room. Let's take that with a little bit of a grain of salt.
There's always just one brain in the room. Okay. Quote, fact-checked the allegations and debunked the charges against Dominion, but Fox kept airing them. And then Fox subsequently canned the Brain Room members, fired them.
Right. And to the point, if you're trying to show that Fox knew and what their intent was, I mean, the Brain Room did fact check these and debunk them. So they knew. They went out, when they tried to do the right thing, when they tried to arrive at the truth, they found it. And then everybody not only disregarded it, but then they canned them all. So, if you were trying to show, again, going back to the whole purpose of the lawsuit from Dominion's perspective, if you're trying to show malice, if you're trying to show reckless disregard for the truth, this is what that looks like, right? Yeah. It's not like, I read the papers and so I should have known it. No, you had a group whose specific job it was to go out and fact check and find the truth. They, in fact, did their job, found the truth, and you then ignored it, and then you fired them all. So it again, from an evidentiary perspective, to me, you know, who knows what'll happen in a trial, but Dominion's case seems so strong, and, you know, defamation is hard to prove, but this, my gosh, just evidence after evidence after evidence. All these statements are just so damning from a legal perspective, from a moral perspective, from, you know, whatever, any number of perspectives. But, you know, Dominion's just, I think, is sitting in a strong position right now.
Yeah, no, I concur. And then there was just a couple more things about firing people. We know Murdoch, now we know that Murdoch had urged Dobbs's firing because, quote, he was an extremist.
Crazy Uncle Lou, right?
But only after the election, because Dobbs had Trump's support and his dismissal could lead to viewers abandoning Fox. So he kept the extremist on the air, didn't fire him until later because he was afraid to lose viewers. And he suggested longtime VP Bill Sammons' firing after the Arizona call. Remember how Fox was the first to call for Arizona? Said that firing him, he did that because it was a big message with the Trump people. So a lot of these firings, the brain room, Dobbs, and Trump, whether he was not firing them or firing them, was to please Trump people.
Right. And kind of the final observation on this, to the extent anybody is harboring any illusions, this isn't about the Republican Party. This is about the cult of personality around Donald Trump. This is about followers who are his followers. These are not Republicans. These are not MAGA folks. These are people who are loyal to Trump. And everything they'll do with their ad revenue, with their viewership, it is all going to appease them and keep them tuned in. And that's it. Pure and simple. I just keep thinking about, Trump's, I go back time and time again when he's like the speech on the 6th early on, where he's like, take out the mags. They're not here to hurt me. That's all. This is the crowd. They are Trump's people. They are not the Republicans' people. They are not anything other than his followers. And it is almost, you read these terrified Trump executive after another, after announcer, Hannity, disgusted but unwilling to say anything. They're all terrified of Trump and his supporters.
Yeah.
And they'll do anything to keep them appeased. And it's disgusting, and I hope they end up paying billions and billions of dollars for it.
Yeah, do you think, I think Dominion has a really strong suit here. You were saying that you also think so. Do you think it's a $1.6 billion suit? I mean, Fox's only real defense here is First Amendment.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I don't know if it gets to 1.6, but I think it could break $1 billion. And I mean, I think, the one thing is that, Fox does have the money compared to suing Donald Trump. I mean, despite his claims about how wealthy he is, he doesn't, liquidity wise, he doesn't have much money at all, but Fox does. And I think, when we looked at kind of in 2016, sort of like the whole voting infrastructure in the US and all the ins and outs of how it's done and who sells things, every county has different solutions, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think I mentioned this maybe last time or on a different podcast with you, they're like 3 or 4 producers in the United States. That's it. So every single county and state who are doing things differently, at the end of the day, they've got ES&S, Dominion, Smartmatic, and I forget the fourth, like WeVote or something like that. But your choices are limited and everybody has to buy something. And every other democracy around the world who's looking to the United States, who does a good job of it, who, if they're buying it, if you're in Italy or Brazil or France or wherever the case may be, you've heard the stuff about Dominion. So I think, Dominion can probably make a strong argument about market share that they've lost because of all these defamatory statements. When you add on, and I don't know how you calculate this, like all the physical threats to employees and folks showing up at businesses and homes and everything like that, there's a lot of harm there.
Yeah, and I'm also interested to see if there's other prayers for relief. Like Fox has to, remember in the Smartmatic stuff, they had to go on and make a statement, and that be great if all 4 of them just had to get on all at one time and put on dunce caps and say we lied to you or something, just something fun, and then do the worm. I don't know. I'm just coming up with stuff. But, I joke, but this is very, very serious propagandizing, and it's modeled after what we see in state television from autocracies around the world, which is where this autocratic creep comes from, right? Denounce the press. The military is woke. And, it's the great replacement theory, which is the cause of a great many people who went to January 6th to attack the Capitol, is their fear of the great replacement theory. This whole ideology we see from Fox where, in East Palestine, Ohio, the white folks are being left behind. And, that whole sort of narrative, that fear, and then, you add these election fraud lies on top of it. That's just, it seems so textbook to me. I just don't understand how other people can't see it. We've seen it in so many other countries. The Ukrainians must be looking at us like, what are you, new?
Yeah. No, exactly. And what worries me is that, this isn't OAN. It's not some kind of weird fringe, Alex Jones, InfoWars.
I'm sick of being social engineered. It's not funny.
It is still, for a lot of people who aren't, following the DC bubble or, kind of following
the
stuff
number one
closely.
News station.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's absolutely right. And you've got, the popular wisdom is, CNN's kind of centrist, MSNBC is a little bit to the left, and Fox News is a little bit to the right. And when you look at, as you said, the number one watched, Tucker's, I think, on top of all of it. But when you break down the networks, they're on top. But what worries me is all the people, like and some of it was like Jack Keane has this comment where he writes in, he was a retired Army general. When I was in the military in the Army, he was actually at the 101st Airborne Division. He was the division commander way back then, which was a long time ago, like mid-90s. And he writes in essentially like really saying, hey, there's real significant voting fraud issues here to Murdoch. And Murdoch's like, well, yeah, but we gotta back off from Rudy because Rudy's crazy, essentially. But what worries me is how many Army mess halls have Fox News turned on? How many naval vessels at sea have Fox News on in the, the mess hall or the cafeteria, whatever they call it on a ship? How many offices in the FBI or at the Pentagon or DHS or police departments all around the U.S., setting aside the general population, how many folks, because they are a little conservative, tend to believe in law and order, have the network tuned on where now we know just lie after lie after lie was being propagated in the interests of Donald Trump? And what's the impact of that on not only just America in general, but the America that carries weapons, the America that can arrest you, the America that, has access to guns and explosives and tanks and everything else.
Oh, yeah. Fox was always on at the VA. When I was working there, it was always on at the VA.
Right. And that's what, and I get it because it was like in general, like as a Army guy, as a law enforcement officer, just when it came to issues that I cared about as an Army officer, as a law enforcement officer, usually, historically, Fox is kind of, going to have the more conservative, sympathetic take on those issues. And so I get it. And I get why, at the VA, sure. What would most vets want to listen to? Turn on Fox. And so how does that, it's one thing if you're on their news during the day, but then if it stays on at 8 o'clock and, and then in comes Tucker and then in comes Hannity and then in comes Laura. And then Sunday morning, let's turn it on. And there's, Marie Bartiromo and Judge Janine, if she's really sober in the morning, maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, allegedly, right? So
yeah, I bet they were like, let's just put her in at noon because she won't be drunk from the last night and she hasn't started drinking yet.
Right, your daytime's up, mornings only. Before but no, you're right, and that is one of the reasons why authoritarian regimes have state media. Mm-hmm. That's because you can push out this propaganda, and there are, huge chunks of the population that's all they consume, not because they don't know that they should be looking for a choice. It's just on, it's there, and so okay, well, they probably exaggerate, but I'm gonna buy into this, wittingly or not, a large portion of it, and I worry about that because I don't see any sign it's gotten better.
No, and that's all coming from the party where we get a lot of Russian money pumped into. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and some, let's see, we got some, well, you know what? I'll let you tell it because this is your wheelhouse, but we're going to talk about Vladimir Voronchenko and Viktor Vekselberg right after this quick break. Everybody stick around.
I'm Greg Oliar. 4 years ago, I stopped writing novels to report on the crimes of Donald Trump and his associates. In 2018, I wrote a best-selling book about it, Dirty Rubles. In 2019, I launched Prevail, a bi-weekly column about Trump and Putin, spies and mobsters, and so many traitors. Trump may be gone, but the damage he wrought will take years to fully understand. Join me and a revolving crew of contributors and guests as we try to make sense of it all. This is Prevail.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. We have some more incredible patrons to thank. We had 35 new patrons, new and returning patrons this week. So that's very cool. So thanks to Ben Mosoir, David Gray, Emily Browning, Emily Trussell, Celinda Areno, Dory Oberg, Shauna Sweet, Romy Baker, Ferret Maestro, very cool name, Carol Hughes, Rena Ratkovich, Tristan Walker, Maureen McCleary, Julianne Horn, and Dereliction of Duty, Doody, Pete.
Clever. Thank you all. That's fantastic. So let's talk about Russians, which is always a good thing to talk about.
Do you know anything about Russians? Are you familiar with
some, and especially this knucklehead that we're going to talk. So this past Friday,
but you do, right? So everybody,
I do, yeah. So when I was,
check out the first few chapters of Compromised, a book by Pete Strzok.
Right.
You can read about ghost stories. Maybe watch The Americans. You can get a little bit of insight into what Pete knows about Russians.
A little bit, and it was always interesting, like what we're seeing now, just the overlap between the formal Russian government, Vladimir Putin or leaders before him, and the intelligence services, but increasingly just this really muddy overlap between what the government is doing and what all these sort of soft power, whether they're oligarchs, whether they're intermediaries between oligarchs and the formal state power, everything from the Internet Research Agency, who was run by, this guy Prigozhin, who's deep in the Ukraine conflict with the Wagner mercenaries, was also bankrolling some of the contractor work, doing the cyber sort of social media manipulation. But we see it also on the oligarch front with everything from Oleg Deripaska to Vekselberg, which we're just going to talk about. But
how is Eric Prince still walking free, by the way?
I don't know. And I keep wondering whether or not he's going to get wrapped in all this Project Veritas stuff that's going on. But I'm not necessarily hopeful about that. But it's... He's living a charmed life because take a detour on Eric Prince. I know there was some question that he was at least reportedly under investigation for selling prohibited sales of munitions, essentially like I think taking Cessnas and private aircraft and putting weapons on them. And, as soon as you weaponize an aircraft, it's subject to arms export restrictions and laws, and that he had sold, I'm trying to remember if it was Libya perhaps or somebody else, but there was at least this burst of reporting 2-3 years ago, independent of all the meeting in the Seychelles with the Russians and this stuff, that at least for the arms trafficking, he was imminently going to get wrapped up. And of course nothing happened. So he's both, I think, smart, has good attorneys, and is probably very difficult to pin anything on. But I mean, it's been quiet though. I haven't heard his name in a while.
Yeah, I'd shut up too if I was
yeah, well, him. There's this group, right? It's like him, Victoria Tonsig, Joe DeGeneva. Who they have disappeared. I mean, to their credit, I'm sure an attorney saying shut the hell up, because at least DeGeneva and Tonsig, I think, both had their electronics seized as part of the the Rudy round of search warrants that went out, but. They were, again, going back to Fox, it seemed like every other weekend you could tune in either Bartiromo or Uncle Lou, and they would be on there, complaining about the deep state, but they've fallen off the public face of the earth.
Yeah, I hope they got rolled up in the January 6th stuff. Anyway, we're getting off track.
No, so go back. So Viktor Vekselberg, he is a Russian oligarch, and the reason that's important, this past Friday, the U.S. is seeking to seize 6 luxury properties in New York and Florida valued at $75 million, tied to oligarch Viktor Vekselberg, as it continues to pursue the assets of wealthy Russians a year after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And now, for background, Vekselberg is an oligarch. He, at least currently, is in charge of what's called the Renova Group, which is they've got aluminum concerns, they've got energy concerns, including petroleum, interests in Russia, but it is a kind of conglomerated group that, has a tremendous amount of wealth as well as power and influence. Now, the prosecutors in Manhattan on Friday asked the court for forfeitures of the properties in New York City, Southampton, New York, and Fisher Island, Florida. I don't know anything about Fisher Island, Florida, claiming they're the proceeds of sanctions violations.
I think that Jeb Bush's, I think the Bushes are from Fisher Island. At least that's what they say in The Birdcage, the movie. I don't know if that's part of fiction of it, but yeah, Fisher Island, Florida.
I was going to say the fact
Jeb
that
Bushes.
I've never heard of it probably means it's very, very nice. I've heard of like, kind of like Palm Beach or the, what's the place where all the retirees near where, the big Trump standout where all the Republican voter fraud went on, the Village.
The
Villages,
yeah.
isn't that yeah, down there. But I'll look it up. Now, the government also claims they're involved in international money laundering by an individual named Vladimir Voronchenko, who was charged this month. And then this from the Southern District of New York complaint, or the press release about the complaint, quote, "With the filing of this complaint, the United States sends a strong message to those who violate sanctions and engage in money laundering that the United States will use every available tool to forfeit criminal proceeds and will use that money to help our allies in Ukraine under the newly enacted law."
That's the cool part, that they're giving it to Ukraine. Because, just recently, last week, you and I both know that they seized, the Ukrainians seized Rusal, right? Deripaska's assets, and were using that to, well, first of all, he's making aluminum that was making parts to, for weapons that were being used against Ukraine. But then they seized this stuff from EN Plus and Rusal to help people who are impacted by the war.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was, it's funny because there was an FBI search he has a residence here in Washington, D.C., just off Mass Ave on Embassy Row. And the FBI went in and searched that, did a day-long search and took out a bunch of information. Now, whether that was assets for forfeiture or not, I don't know. But Deripaska's a bad dude. And, the question is, I guess I'm curious what your thoughts about, at the end of the day, do sanctions really work in terms of changing behavior? I'm sure none of these oligarchs are happy about it, but I still, in the back of my mind, have some question about whether or not it has really any efficacy in driving behavior change. I don't know what you think.
If one of the goals is to piss off the oligarchs and make them angry at Putin for wrecking their lives and taking away their money and yachts and boats and sex coaches and whatever the hell else, then it might, because we don't have teams of assassins who go in and take out these kind of leaders, and we're sending as much aid as we can. We're not yet sending F-16s. Maybe we should train people up on that and then send them over, because it could take 4 or 5 months to do so. But the thought has always sort of been lurking in the back of everybody's minds that it could be an ouster of Putin from his own oligarchs, right? Who are just so pissed that that we've got all their boats now. Yacht cops came and took their boats, and I'm sort of making it into just this one thing, but their entire wealth has been frozen, and their assets are being seized and sold to help Ukrainians, and so that has to anger them. And if that's one way, to pressure these oligarchs for to work on an ouster from within Russia, that seems to be one of the best solutions we could have. I think in this. Nobody thought that Ukraine would last more than a couple weeks, a few days, let alone a year now. And so the resolve and the dedication to this fight, to preserving their democracy, to preserving their land, to preserving their people, has just been incredible. And their leadership from Volodymyr Zelensky has just been just amazing, just incredible to watch. And that we're helping expand NATO, we're sending in weapons. All of this is so extremely important. But how this war ends is Russia has to leave. That's it. That's the only way out of this, because Ukraine shouldn't be handing over anything, annexing anything, and they've said as much. And so I think that's always sort of been in the back. Maybe if we sanction the hell out of these oligarchs, there might be some discomfort from within.
Yeah, I think we have to do it. I don't think, given that the option exists, we have to do it only because There are things to be seized. There are assets that can be converted and sent back to Ukraine to assist them. So it isn't something that you can leave alone. I do worry a little bit that when it comes to if the goal is regime change, if the goal is behavioral change, or, some combination of both, those people who are close enough to Putin are going to be the wealthiest and the most powerful. And I do worry, it's like sophisticated crime in the U.S. I mean, you can pick up the nickel dime drug dealer, you can pick up the low level and white collar criminal, but when it gets to the really, really sophisticated, really, really wealthy criminal, it's very hard to do that because they have the resources to hide what they're doing, to hire good attorneys. And it makes, I see in some ways an analogous situation, like the prospect of somebody like Deripaska or even Vekselberg. The idea that, are they going to be angry? Yes. Is this a significant amount of money for anybody, even if you're a, approaching billionaire? Yes. At the end of the day, is the best sort of sanction implementing team going to be able to tease out the 20 layers of LLCs routing through Cyprus, routing through Panama, routing through the Bahamas, through 7 layers to be able to trace it back and say, okay, these, $500 million worth of assets, we can go through these 17 layers and tie them to, wealthy oligarch fill in the blank? I don't know. So again, I think it's a good idea and necessary to do it. I do wonder at the end of the day whether if it comes to who are the people who can reach out and touch Putin, are these going to effectively reach out and touch them? I don't know, but we have to try. And you might as well, if you got a tool in the toolbox, use it. Because what's going on in Ukraine, you gotta, right?
Yeah, and this klepto capture task force is, at the very least, we are seizing assets and turning that money into useful money for Ukrainians. So that's bottom level.
Yeah, for sure. And we got a couple of quotes from the folks in that klepto capture task force. So HSI Special Agent in Charge Ivan Arvelo said, quote, "For years, Russia's weaponization of corruption has relied on opaque legal structures and Western enablers to move, hide, and spend stolen wealth, enriching its oligarchs and ultimately resourcing the war in the Ukraine." Now, what's interesting there is the specific tip to the Western enablers, because what I didn't see, I saw Voronchenko, I saw Vekselberg, but it's clear the illusion in there is that, people yet to come, presumably these Western enablers, are also going to be subject to that. So, not only was this directly them, but that quote to me sort of felt like, more to come with this.
Yeah, and I just want to make clear to everybody, this is quoted directly from DOJ website when they say the Ukraine. That's not us. That's direct quote from from HSI Special Agent Ivan Arvelo.
And I will note, the FBI gets it right. So no diss on HSI, but then when FBI Acting Special Agent in Charge Magid Benham said, quote, "The mission of the Interagency Task Force Klepto Capture," I'm not sure about the name, but is what it is to enforce sanctions, export restrictions, and economic countermeasures imposed by the United States in response to Russia's unprovoked military invasion of Ukraine 1 year ago. This civil forfeiture complaint is an example of the task force's ongoing work to fulfill this mission.
Yeah.
So it's good. And it's good to see, HSI and the FBI always like to see good, interagency joint work going on together here. And, it's a lot of money and that's a lot of houses. And, we'll see who, go to, I guess, what do? You seize them and then put them up for auction and sell it to somebody, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works either. I've never been to an auction where they were selling Russian yachts and giant brownstones. So I'm always I'll take that Honda scooter. I don't think they have anything like that. But a little bit of background on here. Basically, what was happening was in April 2018, Department of Treasury's Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, designated Vekselberg as a specially designated national SDN in connections with its findings. The actions of the government of the Russian Federation in Ukraine constituted an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of foreign policy of the United States. So basically they sanctioned him. They put him on the OFAC list. Now, prior to his OFAC designation, between 2008 and 2017, Vekselberg, through a series of shell companies, like you were mentioning before, acquired 6 real properties in the United States. Now, this Voronchenko fellow, who is Vekselberg's close friend and business associates, he got a lawyer who practiced in New York in connection with the acquisition of the properties. And that lawyer managed the finances of the properties, including by paying common charges, property taxes, insurance, other fees associated with properties in the U.S., dollar transactions from the attorney's interest on lawyers' trust accounts. So that's an IOLTA account. So he was managing all this money and paying all the real estate costs. But prior to Vekselberg being sanctioned or being designated as on the OFAC list, between February 2009 and March 2018, companies owned by Vekselberg sent about 90 wire transfers totaling about $18.5 million to that IOLTA account. And at the direction of Voronchenko and his family member who lived in Russia, that lawyer used those funds to make various U.S. dollar payments to maintain and service the property. So this is just sort of the DOJ tracking where all the money went, who it went through, who it came through. And they said that the case is being handled by the office's Money Laundering and Transnational Criminal Enterprises Unit. And then they named the assistant U.S. attorneys who are working on the charge or, in charge of that action. So that's the whole sort of background of how the money, how it was ill-gotten and how it was sent to this lawyer through this one guy and sent through all sorts of shell companies and then used to maintain these real properties. And so that's what's allowing them to seize those properties, right?
Yeah, and I pulled up the calculator because I was curious. If you're curious, if you're going to make 90 wire transfers of $18.5 million, that works out to about just over $200,000 per transaction. So these aren't, this isn't structuring, a $7,000 transfer and a $2,500 transfer to get under some $10,000 reporting limit. These are sizable transfers. And all of that detail on the attorney, quote unquote, really makes me believe the quote unquote attorney is about to be the quote unquote indicted person. I mean, there's a lot of detail in there that when you look at this it is dealing in a way that appears to be designed to avoid detection by and with somebody who is a sanctioned individual engaged in activity that the attorney should have known he shouldn't have been doing. So it's certainly, reading that, this was a forfeiture order, but it certainly to me looks like, that attorney at a minimum is potentially facing some criminal liability down the line here. Yeah,
along with their Western enablers, who I guess are probably real estate transaction folks in Florida and New York. I mean, are we going to see Bayrock pop up? I mean, it's very interesting that the popular homes for oligarchs in the United States are New York and Florida. I mean, we know about Rablovlev, I can never say his name right, who bought the $100 mansion or $100 million mansion from Trump down in Florida. We know all the floors in Trump Tower that were bought by Russians and then sold for cash after a year and for like half the price. Like all of this stuff just seems to always happen where Trump has properties. Now, I'm not saying they're connected, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some common entities between those two real estate folks.
Yeah, and for Vekselberg, too, and talking about Trump, I mean, a lot of your listeners will know this if they were following you back during the Mueller, she wrote days. But Vekselberg came to some sort of level of notoriety because when he, and still is, in charge of this Renova group, Columbus Nova is a U.S. organization that, at least as of 2017, was listed as a subsidiary of the Renova group. Columbus Nova was headed by a guy named Andrew Schrader. And, this came out during the Mueller investigation, and they subsequently changed Columbus Nova to, I think, Sparrow Group or something like that. But they changed the name because Columbus Nova was so toxic. But they were friends, and the way as described by Andrew and Schrader, and I'm not, going to get into anything.
Actually, aren't they?
Yeah, right. There's a relationship there, and I'm not touching on anything that's not, this is all what's been reported in the media. I'm not going to talk about what was, going on behind the scenes with Mueller that's not unredacted in the report. But, bottom line, I'm going to spill it on right now. Make some news. No, but the question was, is in fact this truly an independent organization within the United States? To what extent, and Schrader said, look, Vekselberg was my primary client. Like by far and away, the things that I was doing, the money I had to invest was because of him. Yeah, I had other clients, but he was by far and away the big one. The reason this becomes very interesting is that Schrader put Cohen in contact with Vekselberg. Vekselberg came into town, met Cohen, certainly went and attended, I think, the inauguration with both Michael Cohen as well as Andrew Intrater. And so these links to Trump that were coming up as we were trying to understand what, if any, Russian connections exist between, or what connections, if any, exist between Russia and Trump, Vekselberg was a really critical point for us to look at.
Yeah, $500,000 went into Cohen's essential consulting fund, along with, like AT&T and then some Novartis. I mean, a lot of companies put millions of dollars but they were basically buying access to Donald Trump.
Right. And some of that's like, okay, so how do you tease out, it is kind of the unseemly but legal sort of process of American politics, right? You do have big business who are trying to, get connections with and favor from the incoming administration. And that's just kind of the nature of the political system. And then the question was, okay, is this just a straight sort of commercial political transaction? What are the laws if it's coming from a foreign entity versus a domestic one? To what extent? Because most oligarchs, they are not organs of the Russian state, but the connections between most of the large oligarchs and the political power of the Russian state are significant, and they will act as proxies for each other both ways. And so trying to understand that was a lot of effort went into that. So, at least by the time I left, I don't think we had a complete understanding of everything Vekselberg did or didn't do. But, seeing him pop up in this context, I'm glad to see him sanctioned. He's a bad dude. He deserves to lose all these properties, and I hope he's angry. And, hopefully, as you said, enough of these guys will be angry enough that they'll, do something to Putin.
Yeah. And we will keep everybody posted on this lawyer fella, Vladimir Voronchenko's lawyer, to see if he gets rolled up in this, indicted, and if any of these quote unquote Western allies, Western enablers, get rolled up in this. It'd be very interesting to see if they do asset forfeiture stuff, if there's indictments, how it all plays out. But, we'll keep an eye on it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one unrelated data point tease that I'll throw out there, going back to our sort of late week update last week. I saw today there's an Atlanta Journal-Constitution article that Fawny, which is the correct pronunciation, they note in that article, like a fawn, like a deer, but not Fanny, it's Fawny. There are the sitting grand juries have a term of 2 months. There are 2 which expire at the end of February, and another 2 are named at the beginning of March, and they meet twice a week. And so if you're trying to think about when charges might come, the question is, did she try and because she's got to introduce all her evidence and get everything in there, did she try and rush that in before the end of this grand jury, which is tomorrow? Or is she waiting for the next grand jury, which is impaneled in early March? And
they get sworn in on March 7th, Anna Bauer says.
Oh, there you go. So if I were a betting person, I'd bet she's getting her ducks in a row, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, waiting for this 2 months that she's going to have these new grand juries rather than trying to, cram it in. But the point being, if we're going to hear anything from this existing grand jury, their term is about to run out, so we're going to hear it soon. My guess, we're going to be looking at, the next one. But, if it's a 2-month term, March 7th through May 7th, right? So that's hopefully the window to hear something.
Yeah, and I'll be on vacation the week of March 6th, which usually means something will happen.
Oh, yeah. Huge. Yeah.
So, Fawny, if you're listening. All right.
We'll find you. We will find you and drag you from the mountain beach villa, wherever the hell you are. We'll drag you out to an emergency podcast.
Undisclosed location. You can reach me by text, Pete, just so you know. But yeah, there we'll be talking about that for sure. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to Clean Up on Aisle 45. Thank you for being patrons. You make this show happen, as do people who listen to this show for free. Thank you as well. We can't say thank you enough. If you want to become a patron, little as $1 an episode, you can do it at, patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. We'll be back next week. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok.
And this is Clean Up on Aisle 45. Clean Up on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Malarkey. Our art and logo designer by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.
Season 4 of How We Win is here.
For the past 4 years, we've been making history in critical elections all over the country. And last year, we made history again by expanding our majority in the Senate, beating election-denying Republicans in crucial state house races, and fighting back a non-existent red wave.
But the MAGA Republicans who plotted and pardoned the attempted overthrow of our government now control the House, thanks to gerrymandered maps and repressive anti-voter laws. And the chaotic spectacle we've already seen shows us just how far they will go to seize power, dismantle our government, and take away our freedoms.
So, the official podcast of The Persistence is back with Season 4. There's so much more important work ahead of us to fight for equity, justice, and our very democracy itself. We'll take you behind the lines and inside the rooms where it happens with strategy and inspiration from progressive changemakers all over the country.
And we'll dig deep into the weekly news that matters most and what you can do about it with messaging and communications expert, co-founder of Way to Win, and our new co-host, Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
So join Steve and I every Wednesday for your weekly dose of inspiration, action, and hope.
I'm Steve Pearson.
And I'm Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
And this is How We Win.